Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Richard sent me a crazy story, and what's funny is I remembered what the headline said in his email to me, and I was at a different computer. So I simply typed in what I thought were the keywords from the title, and I wound up getting 1 million hits. It's widely reported, so it's not one of those things that you have to wonder, is this a true story or not? I'm going to go with a version from Forbes magazine, but it was widely reported elsewhere. A $100,000 parking violation shows why Americans need protection from excessive fines. A $100,000 parking violation. Andrew Weimer wrote the story for Forbes. And here's the thing. The woman is accused of misparking, that is, malparking, parking poorly in her own driveway. This is not in a handicap spot. This is not in front of the courthouse. This is not downtown. This is on her own property. A $100,000 parking violation. Sandy Martinez was shocked when she found her Florida town had been fining her $250 per day for over a year. The bill for her property code violation had climbed to over $100,000 because a car was parked with two of its wheels on her grass instead of her driveway. But the car was on her own property, which is her own grass. So she fixed the issue over a year earlier, and then she says that it kept going somehow. No one at the city responded, and they didn't respond to follow-up calls either. Over the course of the next year, the fine kept building. No one from the city reached back out to let her know that she was technically still in violation. So she found out that they were upset that she had a car parked with wheels in the grass. Apparently she moved the car, and they kept fining her for some weird reason. She's a working mother of three, tried to reach the city from time to time, but the fines were overwhelming. Combined with fines for two other minor violations from years earlier, which was a fence that fell over during a storm, and cracks in her driveway. She now owes the city of Lantana $165,000. $165,000. Now, excessive does seem like the right word to describe these fines, Andrew Weimer writes, but even though both the U.S. Constitution and the Florida Constitution prohibit excessive fines, it is not exactly clear when a fine becomes unconstitutionally excessive. So how could a parking infraction lead to $165,000 in fines? She bought her home in 2004, and her sister lives with her and works full-time. Because of their varying schedules, they each have their own car. On the occasions they are all home at the same time, the driveway is crowded, and sometimes one car might have its wheels on the lawn. Now, there's nothing unsafe about this. The neighbors have never complained, but code enforcement in Lantana actively pursues what they call cosmetic violations. And if you got a car parked in your grass, I can't have that. Now, I know some people are going to say, Steve, there could be a problem here. If someone parks their car on their front lawn, or they got boats or RVs, or heaven forbid, a Toyota, whatever, trailers, they you don't want the yards looking like a junkyard. We understand that. But the point is that you should come by and look at it and ask yourself, is this reasonable? Is this not reasonable? And is this the reason the code exists? And if you think about this, if you've got a driveway and there's no curb or anything, just a driveway and it goes straight to grass, and someone pulls in and they put one wheel slightly on the grass, is that really something for which they should be fined $250 for? Sandy has little hope of being able to pay the fines, which are 4 times more than what she makes in a year. At this point, she's effectively a renter in her own home. If she sold it tomorrow, she wouldn't be able to pay back the bank and pay the city what they're owed. So her offense wasn't affecting the safety of anybody. The city just doesn't like how it looks when residents don't park perfectly and squarely in their driveway. So Lantana, by the way, is not the only city in the U.S. to levy sky-high fines for minor code violations and to stack fines on top of fines, even while residents are trying to get into compliance. Andrew Weimer recently wrote about a guy named Joe Corsini in New York City who kept getting tickets for an unpermitted pigeon coop, even while he's working with the city to make it legal. And in December, he wrote about the Victors in Eagle, Wisconsin, who have nearly $90,000 in fines for parking trucks on their 10-acre rural property. For many cities, there's simply no upper limit to what they will fine residents, no matter how minor the violation. But excessive fines have long been recognized as unjust. We've talked before about the case of Timms versus Indiana, the guy who had his car seized over a minor drug offense. And the Supreme Court said you can't do that. There's got to be some proportionality between what the allegation is and what the fine is. So Justice Ginsburg noted that the Magna Carta, going all the way back, established a principle that is now over 800 years old, that economic sanctions be proportioned to the wrong and not be so large as to deprive someone of their livelihood. And that 800-year-old understanding was then reiterated in the Constitution, Eighth Amendment. The founders understood there was a strong temptation for government to hand down ruinous fines, hence why the prohibition was included in the Bill of Rights. But instances of sky-high fines like Sandy's still abound because few state courts have ever fully articulated what factors are relevant to determining whether a fine is unconstitutionally excessive. And that is beginning to change. So, for instance, after Timms, the Indiana Supreme Court established that courts must consider the particular financial circumstances of a person being fined and determine whether the punishment is proportional. And California's Supreme Court has instructed courts to consider the total fine imposed, not just the recurring daily fine, in determining whether a fine is excessive. So in other words, Lantana could say, well, this isn't excessive. It's just $250 a day. Well, when you stack it up over $100,000, that's excessive. So Sandy recently teamed up with the Institute for Justice to sue Lantana in Florida State Court. Florida's Constitution bans excessive fines, but it's been nearly 100 years since the state's Supreme Court addressed that provision. And even then, the court issued only the vague guidance that a fine which shocks the conscience is unconstitutionally excessive. It's time for the modern Florida Supreme Court to explain what that means, and Sandy's case looks like a perfect place to start. After all, if any fine shocks the conscience, it is this one. $100,000 for the fact that cars in her driveway occasionally have their tires on the grass. And I know. I've driven through the areas where there's a car out front up on blocks. Your first thought is, oh, some guy's working on his car. You come by a year later, and the whole thing is sunk a few inches. The blocks are now partially underground. And yeah, you don't want that next door. But someone parking with their wheels on the grass, just a little bit, and she said that she's solved the problem and called them. They haven't come out and looked. And apparently they drive by every so often, and it looks like or sounds like they just occasionally go, well, we couldn't get out there today, but we'll just assume she's doing it again. So this is one where it sounds like you have either an overzealous code enforcement officer, or you've got somebody in City Hall who's just decided that they're going to make this their reason for existing, is we're going to enforce these code violations to the nth degree. And I understand the codes exist for a reason. They should be enforced, but they should be enforced with some level of balance or equity. And you look at it. And I've known of situations before where people have complained repeatedly about actual code violations and nothing got done. And a situation like this where no one's complained, but they're going nuts, dropping the sanctions, fining her. And it's not funny in that sense. It's crazy. But $100,000 parking violation, and it's parking in her own driveway on her own property, which is crazy. Richard, thanks for sending it. Forbes published it. Andrew Weimer wrote it. Great article. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Life does not owe you anything because life has already given you everything.